The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell.
Off there to the right, somewhere, is a large island. It's rather a mystery.
What island is it?
The old charts call it Ship Trap Island. A suggestive name, isn't it? Sailors have a curious dread of the place. I don't know why. Some superstition.
Can't see it.
You've good eyes. I've seen you pick off a moose at 400 yards, but even you can't see 4 miles through a moonless Caribbean night.
Nor 4 yards. Ugh, it's like moist, black velvet.
It will be light enough in Rio. We should make it in a few days. We should have some great sport hunting up the Amazon.
The best sport in the world.
For the hunter, not for the jaguar.
Don't talk rot, Whitney. You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares how a jaguar feels?
Perhaps the jaguar?
Bah! They've no understanding.
I think they understand fear. Fear of pain and fear of death.
Nonsense. This hot weather is making you soft, Whitney. Be a realist. The world is made up of 2 classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters. Do you think we've passed that island yet?
I can't tell in the dark. I hope so.
Why?
This place has a reputation. A bad one.
Cannibals?
Hardly. Even cannibals wouldn't live in such a godforsaken place. But it's gotten into sailor lore somehow. Didn't you notice that the crew's nerves seemed a bit jumpy today?
They were a bit strange, now you mention it. Even Captain Nielsen.
Yes, even that tough-minded old Swede, who'd go up to the devil himself and ask him for a light. Those fishy blue eyes held a look I never saw there before. All I could get out of him was, "This place has an evil name among seafaring men, sir." Then he said to me, very gravely, "Don't you feel anything?" As if the air about us was actually poisonous. Now, you mustn't laugh when I tell you this. I did feel something like a sudden chill. There was no breeze. What I felt was a sort of sudden dread.
Pure imagination. One superstitious sailor can taint the whole ship.
Maybe. But sometimes I think sailors have an extra sense that tells them when they're in danger. Sometimes I think evil is a tangible thing with wavelengths. An evil place can broadcast vibrations of evil. Anyhow, I'm glad we're getting out of here. I think I'll turn in now.
I'm not sleepy. I'm gonna smoke another pipe.
Good night then, Rainsford. See you at breakfast.
Right. Good night, Whitney.
There was no sound in the night, but for the muffled throb of the engine that drove the yacht swiftly through the darkness, and the swish and ripple of the wash of the propeller. The sensuous drowsiness of the night was on him. An abrupt sound startled him. Rainsford sprang up and moved quickly to the rail, mystified. He strained his eyes in the direction from which the reports had come, but it was like trying to see through a blanket. He leaped upon the rail and balanced himself there to get greater elevation. His pipe, striking a rope, was knocked from his mouth. He lunged for it.
Ah!
He had reached too far. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face, and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately, he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht.
Help!
But he stopped before he had swum 50 feet. The lights of the yacht became faint and ever-vanishing fireflies. Then they were blotted out entirely by the night. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and doggedly he swam in that direction. For a seemingly endless time, he fought the sea. Rainsford heard the sound of an animal in anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. With fresh vitality, he swam toward it. He heard it again.
Pistol shot.
10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears. The sea breaking on a rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. Gasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford. All he knew was that he was safe and that utter weariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest sleep of his life. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. Sleep had given him new vigor.
Where there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there is food.
Rainsford floundered along by the water. He stopped. Some wounded thing, a large animal, had thrashed about in the underbrush, and one patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small, glittering object caught Rainsford's eye. It was an empty cartridge.
A .22? The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter flushed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it.
He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff. Eagerly he hurried along. Night was beginning to settle down on the island when Rainsford sighted the lights. He saw, to his great astonishment, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom, a palatial chateau set on a high bluff.
Mirage?
But when he opened the tall, spiked iron gate, the stone steps were real enough. The massive door with a leering gargoyle for a knocker was real enough. Yet above it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker. The door opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discerned was the largest man he'd ever seen, a gigantic creature. In his hand, the man held a long-barreled revolver and was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart.
Don't be alarmed. I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City.
He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he'd even heard them.
I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York. I fell off a yacht. I am hungry.
The man's only answer was to raise his thumb to the hammer of his revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand.
It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home. I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet. I am General Zaroff.
Rainsford's first impression was the man was singularly handsome. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face. The face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, withdrew.
Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow. A simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage.
Is he Russian?
He is a Cossack. So am I. Come, we shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later.
Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved, but gave forth no sound.
Follow Ivan, if you please, Mr. Rainsford. I was about to have my dinner when you came. I'll wait for you. You'll find that my clothes will fit you, I think.
Rainsford followed the silent giant. Ivan laid out an evening suit, and Rainsford noticed that it came from a London tailor who ordinarily cut and sewed for none below the rank of duke. The dining room to which Ivan conducted him was in many ways remarkable. About the hall were mounted heads of many animals, lions, tigers, elephants, larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had never seen. At the great table, the general was sitting, alone.
You'll have a cocktail, Mr. Rainsford.
Rainsford noted the table appointments were the finest.
We do our best to preserve the amenities of civilization here. Please forgive any lapses. We are well off the beaten track, you know. Do you think the Champagne has suffered from its long ocean trip?
Not in the least.
He was finding the general a most thoughtful and affable host, but there was one small trait of the general's that made Rainsford uncomfortable. Whenever he looked up from his plate, he found the general studying him.
Perhaps you were surprised that I recognized your name. You see, I read all books on hunting. I have but one passion in my life, Mr. Rainsford, and it is the hunt.
You have some wonderful heads here. A Cape buffalo is the largest I ever saw.
Oh, that fellow. Yes, he was a monster.
Did he charge you?
Hurled me against a tree, fractured my skull, but I got the brute.
I've always thought that the Cape buffalo is the most dangerous of all big game.
For a moment, the general did not reply.
No, you are wrong, sir. The Cape buffalo is not the most dangerous. Here on this island, I hunt more dangerous game.
Is there big game on this island?
The biggest.
Really?
Oh, it isn't here naturally, of course. I have to stock the island.
What have you imported, General? Tigers?
No. Hunting tigers ceased to interest me some years ago. No thrill left in tigers. No real danger. I live for danger, Mr. Rainsford.
The general took from his pocket a gold cigarette case and offered his guest a long black cigarette with a silver tip. It was perfumed and gave off a smell like incense.
We will have some capital hunting, you and I. I shall be most glad to have your society.
But what game?
May I pour you another glass of port?
Thank you, General.
God makes some men poets. Some he makes kings, some beggars. Me, he made a hunter. My hand was made for the trigger, my father said. He was a very rich man and an ardent sportsman. When I was only 5 years old, he gave me a little gun, specially made in Moscow for me, to shoot sparrows with. When I shot some of his prize turkeys with it, he did not punish me. He complimented me on my marksmanship. I killed my first bear when I was 10. My whole life has been one prolonged hunt. I went into the army, and for a time commanded a division of Cossack cavalry. But my real interest was always the hunt. It would be impossible for me to tell you how many animals I have killed. After the debacle in Russia, I left the country. Many noble Russians lost everything. I, luckily, had invested heavily in American securities, so I shall never have to open a tea room in Monte Carlo or drive a taxi in Paris. Naturally, I continued to hunt. Grizzlies in your Rockies, crocodiles in the Ganges, rhinoceroses in East Africa. It was in Africa that the Cape buffalo hit me and laid me up for 6 months. As soon as I recovered, I started for the Amazon to hunt jaguars, for I had heard they were unusually cunning. They weren't. They were no match at all for a hunter with his wits and a high-powered rifle. I was bitterly disappointed. I was lying in my tent one night when a terrible thought pushed its way into my mind. Hunting was beginning to bore me. And hunting, remember, had been my life. I have heard that in America, businessmen often go to pieces when they give up the business that has been their life.
Yes, that's so.
I had no wish to go to pieces. So, I asked myself why the hunt no longer fascinated me. You are a much younger man than I am, Mr. Rainsford, but perhaps you can guess the answer.
What was it?
Simply this. Hunting had ceased to be what you call a sporting proposition. It had become too easy. I always got my quarry. Always. That is no boast. It is a mathematical certainty. The animal had nothing but his legs and his instinct. Instinct is no match for reason. Then it came to me, as an inspiration, what I must do.
And that was?
I had to invent a new animal to hunt.
A new animal? You're joking.
Not at all. I never joke about hunting. I needed a new animal. I found one. So, I bought this island and built this house. The island is perfect for my purposes.
But the animal, General Zaroff.
Oh, it supplies me with the most exciting hunting in the world. I said, what are the attributes of an ideal quarry? And the answer was, it must have courage, cunning, and, above all, it must be able to reason.
But no animal can reason.
My dear fellow, there is one that can.
You can't mean
And why not?
I can't believe you're serious, General Zaroff. This is a grisly joke.
Why should I not be serious? I'm speaking of hunting.
Hunting? What you speak of is murder.
I refuse to believe that so modern and civilized a young man seems to harbor romantic ideas about the value of human life. Surely your experiences in the war
did not make me condone cold-blooded murder.
How extraordinarily droll you are. One does not expect nowadays to find a young man of the educated class, even in America, with such a naive and, if I may say so, mid-Victorian point of view. I'll wager you'll forget your notions when you go hunting with me. You've a genuine new thrill in store for you, Mr. Rainsford.
Thank you. I'm a hunter, not a murderer.
Dear me, again that unpleasant word. Life is for the strong, to be lived by the strong, and, if needs be, taken by the strong. Why should I not use my gift? I hunt the scum of the earth, sailors. A thoroughbred hound is worth more than a score of them.
But they are men.
Precisely. That is why I use them. It gives me pleasure. They can reason, so they are dangerous.
But where do you get them?
This island is called Shiptrap. Sometimes an angry god of the high seas sends them to me. Sometimes, when Providence is not so kind, I help a bit. Look out that window.
Rainsford's eyes saw only blackness. And then, as the general pressed a button, far out to sea, Rainsford saw the flash of lights.
They indicate a channel where there's none. Giant rocks with razor edges crouch like a sea monster with wide-open jaws. Oh yes, I have electricity. We try to be civilized here.
Civilized? And you shoot down men?
Dear me, what a righteous young man you are. I assure you, I do not do the thing you suggest. That would be barbarous. I treat these visitors with every consideration. They get plenty of food and exercise. They get into splendid physical condition. You shall see for yourself tomorrow.
What do you mean?
We'll visit my training school. It's in the cellar. I have about a dozen pupils down there now. They're from the Spanish bark San Lucar that had the bad luck to go on the rocks out there. It's a game, you see. I suggest to one of them that we go hunting. I give him a supply of food and an excellent hunting knife. I give him 3 hours' start. I am to follow, armed only with the pistol of the smallest caliber and range. If my quarry eludes me for 3 whole days, he wins the game. If I find him, he loses.
Suppose he refuses to be hunted.
Oh, I give him his option. If he does not wish to hunt, I turn him over to Ivan. Ivan once had the honor of serving as official whipmaster to the Great White Tsar, and he has his own ideas of sport. Invariably, Mr. Rainsford, they choose the hunt.
And if they win?
To date, I have not lost. I don't wish you to think me a braggart, Mr. Rainsford. One almost did win. I eventually had to use the dogs.
The dogs?
I'll show you.
The general steered Rainsford to a window. Rainsford could see moving about there a dozen or so huge black shapes. As they turned toward him, their eyes glittered greenly.
If anyone should try to get into my house, or out of it, something extremely regrettable would occur to him. And now, I want to show you my new collection of heads. Will you come with me to the library?
I hope that you will excuse me tonight, General Zaroff. I'm really not feeling well.
Ah, indeed? I suppose after your long swim you need a good, restful night's sleep. Tomorrow, you'll feel like a new man. Then we'll hunt, eh? I've one rather promising prospect.
Rainsford was hurrying from the room.
Sorry you can't go with me tonight. I expect rather fair sport. A big, strong... He looks resourceful. Well, good night, Mr. Rainsford. I hope you have a good night's rest.
The bed was good, but nevertheless Rainsford could not quiet his brain. He sought to throw open the door. It would not open. He had achieved a doze when, just as morning began to come, he heard far off in the jungle the faint report of a pistol. General Zaroff did not appear until luncheon.
I do not feel so well. I am worried, Mr. Rainsford. Last night I detected traces of my old complaint. Ennui. Boredom. The hunting was not good last night. The fellow made a straight trail that offered no problems at all. That's the trouble with these sailors. They don't know how to get about in the woods. They do excessively stupid and obvious things. It's most annoying. Will you have another glass of Chablis, Mr. Rainsford?
General, I wish to leave this island at once.
But, my dear fellow, you've only just come. You've had no hunting.
I wish to go today.
General Zaroff's face suddenly brightened.
Tonight, we will hunt, you and I.
No, General, I will not hunt.
As you wish, my friend. The choice rests entirely with you. But may I not venture to suggest that you will find my idea of sport more diverting than Ivan's?
You don't mean...
My dear fellow, have I not told you that I always mean what I say about hunting? This is really an inspiration. I drink to a foeman worthy of my steel, at last. You'll find this game worth playing. Your brain against mine. Outdoor chess. And the stake is not without value, huh?
And if I win?
I'll cheerfully acknowledge my self-defeat. If I do not find you by midnight of the third day, my sloop will place you on the mainland near a town. Oh, you can trust me. I give you my word as a gentleman and a sportsman. Of course you, in return, must agree to say nothing of your visit here.
I'll agree to nothing of the kind.
Oh, in that case... But why discuss that now? 3 days hence, we can discuss it over a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. Ivan will supply you with hunting clothes, food, a knife. I suggest you avoid the big swamp in the southeast corner of the island. We call it Death Swamp. There's quicksand there. One foolish fellow tried it. The deplorable part of it was that Lazarus followed him. You can imagine my feelings, Mr. Rainsford. I loved Lazarus. He was the finest hound in my pack. Well, I must beg you to excuse me now. I always take a siesta after lunch. You'll hardly have time for a nap, I fear. You'll want to start, no doubt. I shall not follow till dusk. Hunting at night is so much more exciting than by day, don't you think? Au revoir, Mr. Rainsford. Au revoir.
General Zaroff, with a deep courtly bow, strolled from the room. From another door came Ivan. Under one arm he carried khaki hunting clothes, a haversack of food, a leather sheath containing a long-bladed hunting knife. His right hand rested on a cocked revolver, thrust in the crimson sash about his waist. Rainsford had fought his way through the bush for 2 hours.
I must keep my nerve. I must keep my nerve.
He had not been entirely clear-headed when the chateau gates snapped shut behind him. Now he had got a grip on himself and was taking stock of the situation. He saw that straight flight was futile.
I'll give him a trail to follow.
He executed a series of intricate loops. He doubled on his trail again and again. Night found him leg-weary, with hands and face lashed by the branches. His need for rest was imperative. A big tree with a thick trunk and outspread branches was nearby, and taking care to leave not the slightest mark, he climbed up into the crotch, and stretching out on one of the broad limbs, he rested. An apprehensive night crawled slowly by like a wounded snake, and sleep did not visit Rainsford. Toward morning, when a dingy gray was varnishing the sky, the cry of some startled bird focused Rainsford's attention in that direction. Something was coming through the bush, slowly, carefully, by the same winding way Rainsford had come. He flattened himself down on the limb, and through a screen of leaves, almost as thick as tapestry, he watched. General Zaroff made his way along with his eyes fixed in utmost concentration on the ground before him. He paused, almost beneath the tree. Rainsford's impulse was to hurl himself down like a panther, but he saw that the general's right hand held a small automatic pistol. The hunter shook his head several times, as if he were puzzled. Then he took from his case one of his black cigarettes. Its pungent incense-like smoke floated up to Rainsford's nostrils. Rainsford held his breath. The general's eyes were traveling inch by inch up the tree. Rainsford froze, every muscle tensed, but the sharp eyes of the hunter stopped before they reached the limb where Rainsford lay. A smile spread over his brown face. Very deliberately, he blew a smoke ring into the air. Then he turned his back on the tree and walked carelessly away. The pent-up air burst hotly from Rainsford's lungs. His first thought made him feel sick and numb.
The general could follow a trail through the woods at night. An extremely difficult trail.
Rainsford's second thought was even more terrible. It sent a shudder of cold horror through his whole being.
Why did the general smile? Why did he turn back?
Rainsford did not want to believe it, but the truth was as evident as the sun that by now pushed through the morning mists.
The general is playing with me. The general is saving me for another day's sport. The Cossack is the cat. I am the mouse.
Then it was that Rainsford knew the full meaning of terror.
I will not lose my nerve. I will not.
He slid down from the tree and struck off again into the woods. He stopped where a huge dead tree leaned precariously on a smaller living one. Rainsford took his knife from its sheath and began to work with all his energy. The job was finished at last, and he threw himself down behind a fallen log 100 feet away. He did not have to wait long. The cat was coming again. Following the trail came General Zaroff, so intent that he was upon the thing Rainsford had made before he saw it. His foot touched the protruding bough that was the trigger. Even as he touched it, the general sensed his danger and leaped back. But he was not quite quick enough. The dead tree crashed down and struck the general a glancing blow on the shoulder as it fell. He staggered, but did not drop his revolver.
Oh, Rainsford, if you are within the sound of my voice, as I suppose you are, let me congratulate you. Not many men know how to make a Malay man-catcher. Luckily for me, I too have hunted in Malacca. You are proving interesting, Mr. Rainsford. I am going now to have my wound dressed. It's only a slight one. But I shall be back. I shall be back.
When the general had gone, Rainsford took up his flight again, a desperate, hopeless flight that carried him on for some hours. Dusk came, then darkness, and still he pressed on. The ground grew softer under his moccasins, and insects bit him savagely. Then, as he stepped forward, his foot sank into the ooze. With a violent effort, he tore his feet loose. He knew where he was now. Death Swamp and its quicksand. The softness of the earth had given him an idea. He stepped back from the quicksand a dozen feet or so, and like some huge prehistoric beaver, he began to dig. The pit grew deeper. When it was above his shoulders, he climbed out, and from some hard saplings cut stakes and sharpened them to a fine point. These stakes he planted in the bottom of the pit, with the points sticking up. With flying fingers, he wove a rough carpet of weeds and branches, and with it he covered the mouth of the pit. Then he crouched behind a tree. He heard the padding sound of feet on the soft earth, and the night breeze brought him the perfume of the general's cigarette. He lived a year in a minute. Then felt an impulse to cry aloud with joy, for he heard the sharp crackle of the breaking branches as the cover of the pit gave away. He heard the sharp scream of pain as the pointed stakes found their mark. He leaped up from his place of concealment, then cowered back. 3 feet from the pit, a man was standing, with an electric torch in his hand.
You've done well, Rainsford. Your Burmese tiger pit has claimed one of my best dogs. Again you score. I think, Mr. Rainsford, I'll see what you can do against my whole pack. I'm going home for a rest now. Thank you for a most amusing evening.
At daybreak, Rainsford, lying near the swamp, was awakened by a sound that made him know he had new things to learn about fear. It was the baying of a pack of hounds. Rainsford knew he could do one of two things.
I could stay where I am and wait. That would be suicide. I could flee. That would be postponing the inevitable.
For a moment, he stood there thinking. An idea that held a wild chance came to him, and he headed away from the swamp. The baying of the hounds drew nearer, then still nearer, nearer, even nearer. On a ridge, Rainsford climbed a tree. Straining his eyes, he saw General Zaroff, and just ahead of him, the giant Ivan. They would be on him any minute now. He slid down the tree, caught hold of a springy young sapling, and to it fastened his hunting knife. With a bit of wild grapevine, he tied back the sapling. Then he ran for his life. The hounds raised their voices as they hit the fresh scent. Rainsford knew now how an animal feels. The baying of the hounds stopped abruptly, and Rainsford's heart stopped too. They must have reached the knife. He shinned excitedly up a tree and looked back. His pursuers had stopped, but the hope that was in Rainsford's brain died, for he saw in the shallow valley that General Zaroff was still on his feet, but Ivan was not. The knife, driven by the recoil of the springing tree, had not wholly failed. Rainsford had hardly tumbled to the ground when the pack took up the cry again.
Nerve, nerve, nerve.
He dashed along. A blue gap showed between the trees dead ahead. Ever nearer drew the hounds. He reached it. It was the shore of the sea. Across a cove, he could see the gloomy gray stone of the chateau. 20 feet below him, the sea rumbled and hissed. Rainsford hesitated. He heard the hounds. Then he leaped far out into the sea. When the general and his pack reached the place by the sea, the Cossack stopped. For some minutes he stood regarding the blue-green expanse of water. He shrugged his shoulders, sat down, took a drink of brandy from a silver flask, and lit a cigarette. General Zaroff had an exceedingly good dinner in his great paneled dining hall that evening. 2 slight annoyances kept him from perfect enjoyment. One was the thought it would be difficult to replace Ivan. The other was that his quarry had escaped him. Of course, the American hadn't played the game. At 10, he went up to his bedroom. There was a little moonlight, so before turning on his light, he went to the window and looked down at the courtyard. He could see the great hounds.
Better luck another time.
He switched on the light. A man, hiding in the curtains of the bed, was standing there.
Rainsford, how in God's name did you get here?
Swam. I found it quicker than walking through the jungle.
I congratulate you. You have won the game.
I am still a beast at bay.
I see. Splendid. One of us is to furnish a repast for the hounds. The other will sleep in this very excellent bed. On guard, Rainsford.
He had never slept in a better bed. Rainsford decided.